Continuing education knows that at the end, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
Okay, welcome to the Conference on World Affairs 2024. Before we get started, I want to give the University of Colorado's land acknowledgement. And
Nikhil, I don't think the mic is working.
it's early. Okay. Before we get started, I want to give we're going to try the tech report.
Do you want to try this one?
Is my voice coming out? Oh. Okay, welcome to the Conference on World Affairs. Before we get started, we'll give a University of Colorado land acknowledgement. The University of Colorado at Boulder, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of indigenous peoples in our state. CWA acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories of the ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native nations. Sorry, folks.
Continuing education knows that at the end, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
Okay, good morning. Welcome to the 2024 Conference on World Affairs. Before we begin, the University of Colorado at Boulder, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of indigenous peoples in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native American nations. The forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado at Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought on indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. One thing for the audience I'd like to mention, if any of you have questions, please raise your hand. One of the panel producers will come by, note your question down, try to make it succinct and to the point on the note card, and we'll try to get to all of them at the end of the session. And if you're a student, please note that on your card, and I'll prioritize asking that ahead of the queue. Okay, today is Thursday, April 11th, 2024, Conference on World Affairs panel 17917, that's 17917, Entrepreneurship and Social Good, Venture Capital, Social Entrepreneurship, and Making an Impact Through Business. My name is Nikhil Mankekar. I'm facilitating this discussion. Many of you know me as past chair of the Boulder Human Rights Commission and currently an appointee of Governor Polis as vice chair of the State of Colorado Venture Capital Authority. Also an alumnus of CU and the youngest winner of the George Norland Award from CU. Today we have an amazing panel of for business, for social good. I will give a brief introduction to each panelist, and then each of them will speak on the topic. We have Ashley J., National Geographic explorer turned tech entrepreneur. She's the founder of Hanascene, a consumer-facing impact campaign application for brands to deliver on their corporate social responsibility initiatives with transparency and credibility. Welcome to Ashley. Now I'll give an intro to each of you. Next we have Florencio Mazzoldi. He is a technology executive who's led digital transformations in several industries, and since 2018, Flo has been running digital technologies at Ginkgo Bioworks, a biotechnology company that designs and engineers microbes for various applications from food, fragrance, to pharmaceuticals and agriculture. Welcome to Flo. Next up, we have Kika Tuff. She's the communications director at Revive and Restore, the leading wildlife conservation organization promoting the incorporation of biotechnologies into standard conservation practice. Its mission is to enhance biodiversity through the genetic rescue of endangered and extinct species. Having a little tech issue with the mic. There's a woodpecker pecking on a cable. Just hang tight. 'Tis the season, it's spring. Good to go? Okay. Again, its mission is to enhance biodiversity through the genetic rescue of endangered and extinct species. Welcome to Kika. And next up, we have Nancy Wang. Nancy is a product and engineering executive and advisor and investor with significant experience in cloud computing, cybersecurity, AI, and SaaS business models. She's a venture partner at Felicis Ventures, where she looks after investments in enterprise infrastructure, B2B, SaaS, and cybersecurity. She's also, as a founder and director and chair of the Finance and Risk Committee of the nonprofit Advancing Women in Tech since 2017, Nancy helps prepare women and underrepresented minorities for leadership roles. Welcome to Nancy.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. And why don't we kick things off? Each panelist speak on the topic for a few minutes. We talked before about this, and we'll begin with Ashley.
Hi. So, as you could tell, I was super eager to get started, and the microphone's going to try to cooperate with me. I work on a tech startup that brings end-to-end transparency to how brands deliver on the impact commitments they make. Right now, if a brand were to tell you that they're going to give 10% of all summer sales to a women's initiative, you don't know whether it's actually going to the women's group, you don't know how much is going to the women's group, you don't know how, if their sales projections for that quarter is the same as it was the previous summer. You don't know if the money, once it went to the impact partner, actually resulted in specific outcomes for those women. So for me, it felt like it was a very broken landscape with a lot of opacities that brands were benefiting from, and that we didn't have any systematic way to hold them accountable to. And essentially, over time, our platform will allow you to, as an end consumer, be able to compare two shoe brands and see if both shoe brands were giving to women, which one's doing a better job of it, right? Or if you were looking across like a shoe brand and a clothing brand, and both were helping women, who's doing a better job of it? And like, you could still support only the brands that are aligned with your value system. And you can also compare like different impacts in the same industry sector. So for instance, if you're looking at two shoe brands and two different impact silos, is a shoe brand committing to women's initiatives making more sense to you? Does it feel like they're running better narratives because they actually know how to outfit women and are thinking about women in a meaningful way that aligns to their brand mission? Or are they just picking a cause out of the dark because it's trending, because it's cool, and so they've randomly aligned themselves with an impact initiative that they know nothing about, right? So you can see when it's disingenuous as well. So these are all the things we are trying to enable as a landscape for the general public. And beyond that, it's also about stakeholdership, because we can't talk about solving for the problems of our time, both social and environmental, without different parties showing up to the table at the times that they're needed. So for instance, a campaign that we're running on our platform against domestic violence against women with a fashion brand in Milan is going to allow for content creators, but not just randomly any content creator, rather women who have been through an instance of violence themselves, to be able to reclaim their story by sharing their story in a way with women who are fabricating this fashion line who are also domestic abuse victims. So the clothing line itself is produced by previously victims who have now reclaimed their narrative and are empowered survivors, and therefore who are other survivors out there whose stories they can align with. And then they're co-creating this positive upliftment for women who have been through something that was a travesty, and then giving them a new context through which they have incredible solidarity, support, and capacity to find community through. So essentially, I believe Entrepreneurship for Good is about how we are able to show up for one another with credibility in a mutualistic manner that allows for every stakeholder that's showing up to know how others are being onboarded and where everyone gets off that pipeline, and also what they get from being part of the pipeline, right? So if everybody's in the know of all of those different moving parts, then there is no way somebody can weasel an upper hand or get something at the cost of others, because you're dividing that pie in public view. So I think it's important for us to have that level of witnessing to occur and real-time insight into how we show up for one another. And it doesn't matter if it's at an institutional level or an individual level. And I think both can happen at the same time, synergistically and synchronously. So.
Great, thank you. Next up, we have Flo.
Yeah, hi all. I run technology for a company called Ginkgo Bioworks. Much simpler than Azure. We just make organisms that solve our problems. Things like sustainability or health, hunger, that's the kind of stuff that we like to create organisms for. So quick example could be like we're working on some bugs that can chew plastic so that we can degrade some of that and not create the mess that is currently out there. So I do that on my day job. I also have a couple of side projects. One of them is a tool that helps diabetics understand and learn how to count carbohydrates better. So that's one of the projects. And I'm also working on advancing DNA nanotechnology as a translational, to translate from science into industry. It's a very early science, and I think it has great potential. So the reason I'm saying all this is, for me, the idea of entrepreneurship for good is to be in projects that have the capability of advancing the world and society for the better. Okay, so I am very much into the way that capitalism works is okay for me, as long as there is the increasing cultural drive to create companies that make the world better. And that's I think, the magic that I think we need to drive towards. Should be an interesting discussion here.
Great. And next up we have Kika.
Yep. Hi, good morning. So I am a science communicator. I work with scientists and organizations to help them kind of translate science for public audiences. And one of the organizations that I work for that I'll be talking about today is called Revive and Restore. So the premise of Revive and Restore is using biotechnologies that are being developed in for-profit spaces. Can we take those and actually use them for good, like conservation good? So we do cloning of endangered species, we do genetic rescue, we do gene editing. Can we gene edit heat-resistant corals? And I would say broadly, I'm excited to participate in this panel because I spend a lot of my career cleaning up corporate messes. I feel like, we're just here trying to undo pollution from big companies and undo extinction driven by big companies. And this whole for-profit model has made a mess. And the idea of trying to say, okay, well, we all need to pay bills. I get that. Livelihoods are an important part of business and entrepreneurship, and building a sustainable livelihood for people is a big part of the goal. But how else can business be measured? How can success be measured in business other than profit? Social impact, doing good. Can we actually make products that provide good livelihoods and actively contribute to solutions, a lot of times to problems they caused to begin with, or industry has caused to begin with. So I'm really excited to unpack that a little bit too.
Great. And Nancy.
Yeah, so I loved hearing the different perspectives on doing social good and what that means. I think ranging from making sure the private sector, I think both Asher and Kika alluded to this, is actually invested in ESG, to Ginkgo Bioworks, which actually we're proud to be one of the early investors. Felices Ventures, one of our general partners, Sandeep, led an early round there. So my version on doing social good or impacting the community through investments or technology is building tech or technical platforms that enable the public to, for example, gain visibility. So that was part of a project I worked on earlier in my career, healthdata.gov, to, for example, now backing companies that help resolve deepfakes, which is, I'm sure you all have heard of that incident in Europe where an employee unwittingly wired $25 million because he thought his boss told him to on Zoom, right? And so especially as we hear, for example, companies like OpenAI announce multimodal models or video models, right? The ability to create very realistic video sequences from just someone's picture, or maybe even in the future, description of someone, especially if that person is famous and has clips out there, right? So those are a lot of the problems, especially related to national security or public safety, that are top of mind. One thing that I'm also passionate about, as we see more companies, software ate the world, then it was data eating the world, now it's AI eating the world, right? So a lot of companies now incorporate generative AI into their business models. How can you ensure that that AI model is inherently fair, right? How do you ensure that the data sets that you're training the model, so for example, if you have a model that says, hey, here's a picture of someone, right? What is the likelihood of that person to commit a crime, specific crimes? And if you're training that on maybe data that is not equitable or fair to specific races or ethnicities, well, then the output of that model is going to also be biased. So those are a lot of the conversations that I'm involved with as an investor and operator in the data space.
Excellent. Thank you, Nancy. Yeah, go ahead, Flo.
Can I be in that?
Sure, go for it. Yeah, were you going to say something? Or-
No.
Yeah.
I was just thinking we should do a fair AI panel at some point. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's a hot topic. I mean, and I think this one is very interesting because from both a policy and a legislative perspective, right, it's one of those instances where you're actually seeing tech drive policy and legislation, and not the other way around. Because coming from more of a data security, data privacy background, right, it was really the policy like GDPR, CCPRA, in California, et cetera, that drove a lot of the technical innovations and frankly created multi-billion-dollar industry category just protecting data or doing data sovereignty, data privacy requirements. Now we're actually seeing companies operating in LLM for security or security LLMs, disrupting how we think about cybersecurity. And that is generating now AI Bill of Rights, different discussions that are being held at the White House and other governments on how should we simply regulate this thing that we don't even know to the full extent of what it does.
Great. Let's have the panel. I'd like you all to address how do we define business for social good? Like, what is good? It's all a matter of perspective in business. In your opening comments, I think each of you talked about, if we look back, say, the last 20 years, a lot of evolution in terms of, say, ESG and all the things we're doing now is in cleaning up past messes, maybe developing regulations and policies that address those, but also how do we define social good in terms of innovation and looking ahead and what we're doing now and not making those same mistakes of the past? So, Kika, how would you address that?
Yeah, so the question of how we define good, what is good? I mean, ESG is a nice framework to think about, like multiple dimensions. We've got environmental goals, we have social goals, we have cultural goals, we have government goals. But I still feel like we are in a space where, the 1% for the planet give back system, for instance, where 99% of the profits are derived from taking from the environment and 1% back for the planet is still not really, an equitable approach to good at all. So I guess for me, good is that all dimensions are incorporated in the design of every product and every mission for every business. Every business needs to account for the fact that you are built on the backs of people, and you are built on the backs of nature, and you are built on the backs of fossil fuels. And, good is thinking about all of those dimensions from the beginning and accounting for all of them. Because the next generation is, of course, stuck trying to fix a climate that's broken and de-extinct species that are gone and repair ecosystems that are broken. And everyone now is getting the money, and everyone tomorrow is going to have to try and build a sustainable livelihood from a system that doesn't function. So anyway, I think there's, it's thinking about all of it from the beginning and trying to actually make a career for yourself based on a solution and not just more of the same stuff.
Yes. Flo.
I can respond, yeah. So in general, I would define good the same way, but I have a much more optimist view than you. I do think that society is valuing those efforts that you're talking about much more than before, and the best people are going to the projects that are actually good or have the potential to be much better. So it's not so much about money anymore. I can give you an example. In Ginkgo, we really strive to use our platform for good. And we have a lot of policies and processes to make that work. And when I try to hire, I am competing with the likes of Google or Meta or something like that around technology in Ginkgo, right? And our main way of attracting the top technologists is talking about the potential good of this platform in the world. And it works. And people are giving up the big Google salary to go into a place that can't pay that well, but has from my perspective, a much better outcome for society.
Yes. And Ashley.
Yeah, so I think we are in a stage where a lot of the frameworks that have been coined are entirely oriented around de-risking liability exposure. It has nothing to do with finding true proactive stewardship or sense of responsibility toward being part of social and environmental contexts. So essentially, you're doing the bare minimum necessary to uplift your reputation as a corporation, to ensure maximizing your shareholder value, your profit margins, while de-risking the possibility of a lawsuit that could emerge from having negative social exposure, negative environmental exposure. This isn't actually doing good in the world, right? It's not what anybody should set out to as a governing reason to create a product or a service. It's not alleviating a pain point. It's just snake oil cures, where we're encouraging vapid consumerism without any intentionality, direct action towards those assets that are the most valuable and important, which you cannot put a price tag on. And in a world where we are assigning all significance through the language of money, you cannot understand that which cannot be understood through money. So we are at a time where what we are espousing at literally every one of the large conferences I attend, from World Economic Forum to all the UN deliberations, every single thing is just rubbish. We talk a lot about doing good, but we don't make good on the doing. So there is a massive gap between intention, which everyone loves. We love talking. Theory is everyone's jam and juice, right? And it's cheap. So everyone's eager. And in fact, I was literally told at a brand conference by other brand leaders that I would be a lot happier if I was okay with it just stopping at talk. Why do you want to see this turn into practice? Why do you want to see this go into execution? You're so frustrated because you're constantly asking for people to enact the change you're talking about. And essentially, the minute you try to do that, when you're actually getting into application-driven solution sets, and I mean holistic, integrated, not thinking through these like silos and myopic rabbit holes we fall into, under the auspices of trying to do good in the world, which it's very easy to do. If you put on horse blinders and say, I'm gonna go save elephants, you can't save elephants without like giving it context, which means it needs an ecosystem to thrive in. It needs ecotourism models instead of models that pilfer into its ecosystem and take and extract from it. You can't have corporate interest driving forward that change. You have to have community leadership, which means those communities need to be empowered, need to have a voice. There's so much at play when you're trying to just save one keystone species, which is elephants. Now, you're talking about multiple issues, but none of these communities are engaged in the right moment in time. They're always consulted as an afterthought. And even in those initiatives where they're trying to bring them in at the forefront, it is sort of happening still to cater the prevailing agenda. Because we have to be honest with ourselves. We cannot have the current paradigm completely upended without every one of our lives in this room affected adversely. Just think about it. Tomorrow morning, your life will not look the same. Are you okay with that level of discomfort? You cannot just wake up, get in your car, and go about business as usual if you're truly looking for systemic change. None of us are willing to do that individually. How can we expect it out of institutions? Because we make up those institutions. Those prevailing thought patterns, those behavioral attitudes make up our institutions. So I think if we're really talking about change, either we start getting really honest with ourselves about the fact that we don't want to, and then we look at how can we, right? Because we don't want to. That level of resistance needs to be addressed. And that needs to be addressed through the extent to which each technical solution, each technology platform is actually going to enable true source level shifts from that which we have gotten complacent about and oriented toward due to convenience. So I think we are all in this space where we like to talk a lot about doing the right thing, and very few of us are actually willing to make the true sacrifices necessary, both at an institutional level and at a personal level, to make that true. And if we are not willing to do it, we are going to hit those tipping points, and we are going to see the negative consequences of every single choice we've made leading up to that tipping point, at which point we will have no choice. That agency is taken away from us, and circumstances will dictate what is going to be taken out of us as the next course of action. And so, do we want to shed agency by allowing the external factors to compound and become more severe? Or do we want to assume autonomy and agency today and make those uncomfortable shifts so that we don't have to be in a space where it's the only way forward?
Yeah, I hear you, and I think that's actually where personally, I see a lot of opportunity for actually legislation and policy to bring some of that teeth. And so my theory is that, with the resources, right? You mentioned, alluded to this, Asher. As individuals, we may not have the resources to affect wholesale change. But if you bring corporations and governments together, this public privacy or public-private partnership, sort of unicorn that we're all striving for. Because if you think back to even a decade ago, right, selling, customer information and data privacy wasn't really a thing. Like, we all talked about, oh, it'd be nice if my information weren't just out there on the internet. But then come GDPR, the right to be forgotten, data subject requests, and if you don't comply with that, right, the EU will fine you. And I think that's where we're seeing a lot of news articles of all the big tech players now being fined for selling customer data, right? And I think that's where, in my opinion, if you have teeth on legislation applied specifically and defined very clearly, that is where we're starting to see a lot of this change in behavior. So we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, Kika.
I kind of wanted to counter because I guess I'm more optimistic than I seem, perhaps, because I think if you can build sort of profitable, equitable models of entrepreneurship while solving problems at the same time. So what if it doesn't come at this major cost to lifestyle and livelihood? But we just pivot the things we priority in entrepreneurship. Like, we stop, prioritizing tech or prioritizing, I don't know, sort of all this profit and the things. And if we started prioritizing, I don't know, businesses that create solutions, or then couldn't we keep the lifestyle, have the high quality of things that we have now, but do good in our work?
Yeah, see, I don't think we understand the footprint of our lives, and I do think we need to take a careful look at that. It's very easy to say, for instance, okay, I'm not being a fatalist, and I'm not saying that we are all doomed. I'm saying that if we're not honest with ourselves, then we're not understanding the true footprint of our lives, and therefore making informed choices and making the commitment to let go of that which we are going to be letting go of. For instance, something as simple as, for instance, her effort, they have equitable pay. Everybody gets an equal split, and they pay themselves equitably, which is a wonderful model, right? And you're still profitable, you're still earning revenue, and you're distributing that equally between all of the stakeholders showing up to make that effort possible in the world. And then numerous cooperatives, numerous things where we are distributive. But does that actually matter at scale when you have an entity that is capable of fishing the oceans out or killing like 200 whales per time that it sets sail? The scale at which we're losing biodiversity is unprecedented. It is at a rate that we cannot even grasp. The numbers elude us. Are we okay waking up and not having songbirds in our backyard? That will be our reality. And it's okay if we accept that that is the future we're leaning toward. And we might have cooperatives that work still. We might still have some farms with some robotic bees running around pollinating our flowers. Somehow we might find hacks, but it's not going to be biodiverse. It is not going to be resilient, but it might be a future we opt for anyway, right? But we need to be honest about the conversation as opposed to saying, we're doing this good, so let's not focus on the rest. Let's not look at the total picture of how all of our compounding consequences and choices layer and work, because we are a part of a whole. And I think as human beings, we are, especially in this generation, predisposed to simplifying the context and getting incredibly binary, and it's just good or bad, or it's conservative or liberal. We're all about this or that. That's it. And that's not life, And we don't even know how to reconcile those antonyms for ourselves that we can concede that there has to be a middle ground. We can't figure that out in politics. We can't figure that out in our value systems. So we're always fighting each other. And if we're fighting each other, we're obviously fighting ourselves as well. Because you cannot be showing up for conflict without having conflict within you. So how many of us are doing the self-work even to address and understand the scale of what it means to be an integrated whole that is part of a whole? And I think when we have majority of the conversations in the brand space especially, brands talk about integrity ad nauseum. They don't have it. They're not integrated wholes because they strip their employees of any agency out of fear. And the culture of fear is pervasive in most corporations that I work with. They do not want to put any communication out because if they do, they're afraid of cancel culture. And when did we, as the public, become so unforgiving? We cannot even tolerate a failure. We cannot tolerate a mistake. We cannot give any benefit of the doubt to anyone who has shown up poorly 5 minutes ago. There is zero compassion, and we demand compassion from others, but we are not willing to extend it ourselves. So when we are so incapable of the fundamental awareness necessary to show up for systemic shifts, even legislative policies that are instituted will be serving specific agendas and will fail other agendas because they're not holistic, they're not thought about, and they don't bring into the room all of the necessary stakeholders, even those that they may not consider necessary, probably the most essential people in the room, that they might deem unnecessary in that moment, is a oversight on their part. And so I think the reason why so many things are broken, and because I work on these larger kind of stakeholdership-driven models, both on the ground and through my tech app, which I only gave rise to the tech app because blockchain was the only way to bring about that level of intuitive, peer-to-peer accountability and models of mutualism. Otherwise, I wouldn't have resorted to tech. Believe me, I'm like the Amish. I prefer being in nature and not dealing with people at all. So the fact that I'm part of the tech industry is a joke. But I will say that some of these things can help us scale the right ways forward, but still the necessity to be aware and honest and willing to engage each other, even if it's a point of dissension that we cannot see eye to eye on. In fact, that's the most critical conversations we should be having. Without those things, we're not going to see the kind of change that is vital right now. Because the next 5 years, we're going to see massive, massive compromises on our part because we have not taken into account that which matters today. And are we willing to have that much taken from us in the next 5 years? Because there are going to be countless lives without access to fresh water, to hygiene, so when you're brushing your teeth, do you bear that in mind? Do you think about how much water you're using in your household? Every single choice you're making as an individual and at an institutional level has consequences today. We're all living in the same planet. We're all in this together. And I think that somehow escapes us. When we go about our everyday lives, when we're showing up for our jobs, it escapes us. And when it does that, there are blind spots that we are not accounting for. And that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that it's a negative picture. I'm just saying that very few of us are having that holistic awareness and understanding when formulating anything. And we're not being honest about where we're failing or where we're falling short.
And Ashley, to those points, I want to get Nancy and Flo's perspective on how that ties into innovation and product development in the technologies you're seeing, because we have young people, we have engaging in developing the technologies of the future, but to what extent do each of you see these concepts, this kind of holistic view to problem solving, I guess, in the culture, but also what philosophies of social good do you see coming into play from the beginnings of these companies and the development in AI and these technologies? Nancy.
Sure. So I've usually viewed innovation in a corporate lens, so that will be the context, my perspective. And of course, currently as a VC, the C does stand for capitalist, so I do need to make returns, right? But with that said, that's why we're really proud to be investors, for example, in companies like Ginkgo Bioworks. Is another company off the top of my head that does, for example, health for menopause. Actually, women going through menopause. We're also investors in a carbon neutral infrastructure, sort of data centers called Crusoe Energy, actually out in Wyoming, I believe. So those represent investments that, of course, not only are positive and yet positive on the capitalistic perspective, but also, in our opinion, can do social good, right? Whether it's healthcare, designing the next antibiotics or gene sequences, as Flo mentioned, or being more carbon neutral with how we're consuming, for example, compute, right? We talk about AI. Well, AI is very compute intensive. And what does that mean? That means you need tons of server racks and data centers that consume water, that consume a lot of power, energy, right? So if we can do that in a more carbon neutral way, right, that allows us to continue fueling innovation, but in a much more holistic, to your point, perspective.
And Flo, same question.
Yeah, so definitely similar view as Nancy here, but like I do think that there is somewhere in the middle where if we don't fully understand what the problems are and the impact that we're having on those problems, like what you were saying, I think that, and I think that is one of the problems. We don't understand if I use 2 more minutes of water to brush my teeth, what is that doing, okay? And without understanding that, I think that the current machinery of entrepreneurship doesn't just work. It doesn't grab because there is no incentive to go solve those problems. So I think that there is an opportunity to clarify what those impacts and those objectives are so that the machinery that Nancy's talking about can kick off and solve some of these problems.
And to that point, Kika, go ahead.
Can I ask a question, Nancy?
Sure.
To you? Well, I guess I am curious, where in the infrastructure of investing, where does prioritizing good come into equations like that? I'm not an investor, so I don't know. But
So there are, so in the world of investing, there's, I don't want to bore everyone with the finance 101 here, but there's different asset classes, right? So I think what you're referring to is perhaps a social, we call them social impact funds, which is very different from, for example, the institutional fund that I'm a part of. Because for an institutional fund, you all get basically measured on different KPIs, right? So from an institutional fund perspective, you get mainly measured on how much money you're able to return to your LPs, who happen to either be pension funds or large foundations, so on and so forth, right? For a social impact fund, there is that additional metric of what social good does this complete? Right? Is it serving healthcare? Is it serving education? Right? Is it serving, basic utilities, basic needs? Right? So there are social impact funds that are doing really, really well, as well, both in the angle of returning financially, financial returns to their investors, as well as accomplishing social good. With that said, though, I think I brought up a couple of examples of even institutional funds, for example, like Felice's and others, that are still able to invest in companies that have that social good component, right? We talked about healthcare, menopause healthcare. We talked about energy. There's also national security. So there's many aspects that I think, as we're starting to look more holistically, capture both the angle of being a financially good investment, but also doing good out there in the world.
Yeah, and I guess my question is, or my follow-up to that is, what would you say the percentage is? Is it sort of like social impact funds are 1%, and the profit-driven funds are 99%, and it's the rare investor that considers good outside of a social impact fund? Or do you feel like there is systemic, yes, investors are on board, the system is shifting, we see, everybody's asking about social good. I'm kind of curious the temperature of that.
Yeah, So I like to see investments of what impact they're making, right? So I think one of the best examples out there, I'm very passionate about education and the access to education regardless of where you are, right? That's why I'm a firm believer in Coursera and putting course offerings on Coursera that people can access without paying anything, right? And so, for example, there was a recent investment that we did that, schools, Chromebooks are greatly penetrated in K through 12. Right, so if you're able to deliver high quality content on Chromebooks, right, that not only has a far-reaching aspect, but also from a returns perspective, right, the states who sponsor these schools or private charter schools, right, they see that return on investment. So I would say I don't know the exact percentages, but there are. I'm happy to follow up afterwards and give you a list of social impact funds, pure institutional funds, but there are so many funds like ours that cross over the two.
On that same topic, I think we can, on the same topic, I think we see between social impact funds and institutional VC funds a confluence happening, and so that can be driven by some of the things you talked about, policy. It could be ESG goals, a number of ways to kind of prod institutional investment into investing in companies that say have a social good and are solving problems but can be incredibly profitable. So flow, like for example with your company, to what extent have you seen your investment interest come from, say, institutional and traditional VC funds versus did you look at social impact investment as a source of funding as well?
I am not too knowledgeable about the sources of Ginkgo funds, but we have gone public in the last couple of years. So the funds have gone distributed quite a bit, but still some of our institutional funds are a big portfolio of who's funding Ginkgo.
Yeah, Asha.
So we are a pre-seed tech startup. We haven't raised institutional capital yet, but the institutional capital that we are speaking to for the seed round and even like for a pre-seed second raise that are interested are values aligned with us. And it's a literally drop in the bucket. And I can tell you that straight up. Because the way most of them operate, they're sheep. Secondly, the way that social innovation is supported. I mean, a lot of words are bastardized by virtue of overuse. So we use innovation a lot, we use disruption a lot, and we say change makers a lot. I hate all three words. And here's why. Because it is diluted the more we say it, and because very few people actually show up for it. And particularly when capitalism embodies these words, it is only driving forth that which it can further consolidate and self-protect. So yes, are they funding the next level of innovation within the same system? Absolutely. They are doing innovative things. I'm not disputing that. But is the innovation allowing us to shift course in any capacity? No. So if you were to truly look at protecting that which the portfolio is already heavily entrenched in, heavily invested in, and wants to see succeed, when they're already close to exits within certain models, they're not going to go diversify and counter bet against their primary source of revenue. That's what puts food on their table. So you have to look at, where the agenda lies before we start looking at capitalists being capable of genuinely supporting disruption from the way the current system operates. Having said that, we are a revenue positive company, right? We are a profitable company. We are a C Corp. I haven't even established B Corp because that, I'll get into it, it's a whole different beast to unpack. But I would say, how do I try to navigate this every day? It is truly a discourse that you need to have with yourself every single day. You need to touch base and see if this alignment is the right alignment to move forward with, because every single yes to a VC investment, to an angel investment, is a marriage, and it gives up some freedoms, it gives up some level of autonomy that you might have. Your board will change as you grow. I know a friend of mine who set out, okay, and this is the honest insight as founders versus what you'll hear from funders. So as a founder, I know a friend of mine, Series B, has raised all this capital and had to recapitalize her table after having raised 44 million. And the reason she had to do it, again, because she got played by her own board, because the board got replaced over time and became completely capitalistic in its interest. And even though the initial board was more aligned with her value system, not so as they changed within their organizations, right? So then they replaced the board members. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it was she received all these amazing awards in the past year. Like she's a visionary award, all these things at the UN. And she literally turned to me and she's like, I cannot believe what a ruse this is, because my company was started because I was sick as a kid and I fell ill to 9 waterborne diseases before I turned 15. And I wanted to make a difference in this world and ensure other women weren't getting stricken by waterborne diseases. To date, my company has not done anything for a single community. And she's getting visionary awards. She finds that to be a joke. But that is the reality of the world we live in. The less change you make, the more likely you are to be celebrated and receive every one of these awards. and the ruse of this, I think, is that you get a larger stage to endorse the fact that you have not actually enabled true change. And it's a little disillusioning, it is disheartening, but at the same time, like, I have so much rage in me against this level of repression for change, right? And that's what motivates me every day. So where do I find my resiliency, hope in this system that seems formidable, that seems impossible to escape on a daily basis? It stems from the fact that there are people who are willing to have the uncomfortable conversations, who will work with you in enabling the kind of shifts that are necessary. And so it may be slow, it may be incremental, but that's why you need to cultivate patience and look at a way to assimilate as opposed to being the next point of dissension. So over time, like when I'm working with corporations, I don't expect a big company that has done a whole lot of things that are not on the up and up to suddenly shift gears and be completely on board in doing something good in the world, right? They're not going to get that. So then you have to handhold them and help them make those incremental shifts. So do you have the capacity, the bandwidth, the compassion to extend to a corporation that may not see eye to eye on your value system at all? And can you show up every day to help them cultivate that fabric of integrity? It takes a lot out of you. I mean, it's a constant burnout, right? But the thing is, you need to feel like truly called to that alignment within you that you're meant to realize, which makes you want to show up. Because if you don't genuinely care, I don't think you would survive this fabric, because it's all built against wanting real change to occur. And so you have to have an incredible level of tenacity to not quit, because people are forced to quit, or are they hoping you'll quit, or you get sacked because you've been the outlier and you're asking for too much. You know, and I know this from corporate contracts I've been in. You get a muzzle on you through legal. You get a muzzle on you from like the C-suite, right? Like that you're working with. They tell you straight up, like, you can't say the following things out in public when you're working with us. Or you're in NDAs. So you might know a lot more than you're able to disclose. But all of that is part of this fabric of trying to do good in the world, and the enterprises for good, capitalism for good. So I think, like, again, this is about like being honest. Let's call a spade instead of trying to call it all these beautiful euphemisms. And it's just rubbish. It's just hollow things that we're saying out loud because it feels good to say it, but it's not actually what we're doing. What we're doing is very different from what we are claiming we want to do.
Interesting. So one thing I've found in establishing VC funds for the state of Colorado is, in the past couple years, I've established 3 funds with a focus on investing in women and underrepresented entrepreneurs who, when it comes to BIPOC and women representation in VC funding, less than 2% of all VC funding was going to that demographic. So it's a massive, massive inequity. So in founding new funds for the state of over about 100 million plus to invest in the state with that focus, I found tying in fun themes like investing in climate tech and ag tech, and some of these social good type of innovations, not to use something that a word that you hate, but using companies that are innovating to address these issues and these problems is a way of, say, divesting without divesting. So if you do it to begin with, then you don't have to, say, divest which an existing fund, which is a big topic of among institutional investment. And so I've just found in kind of combining my DEI and finance and human rights background that you have to be sneaky sometimes. So in working within a system, as the panel is talking about, you have a system that you're trying to make change within, and you can't always, I found you can't always just announce loudly, like, this is it and this is the change that's happening. Sneak your ways in. If you truly want to make effective social change, sometimes you have to do it without people, the big decision makers knowing about it, and getting people to do it without them knowing, and then the money moves into the places it needs to go. So I found that to be an effective way of kind of addressing these issues within finance and investment. But I wanted to talk, Kika, I wanted to ask you, one thing that came up among panelists is we have all these, everything is an ecosystem, and we have these macro level changes and crises happening that need to be addressed, but people in their day-to-day lives don't always associate their decisions with those. And so I want to get to the topic of communication and communication around business for social good. How do you see, what are the effective ways that communication can mitigate that issue, and some ways that you see it actually happening?
Sure. Yeah, it's an interesting space to be in communication around things like climate change, the biodiversity crisis, extinction, because studies show that being too negative doesn't work. So you're supposed to be hopeful and tell optimistic stories that inspire action. And while secretly, you're like 90% of coral will be gone by 2050. So we're gonna okay, we need to communicate about the promise that gene-edited coral could maybe recover, while also simultaneously investing like crazy in biotechnologies to biobank coral, because there's a pretty good chance that a lot of it will be gone by the time we're field testing any corals like that. So, being in the communication space is kind of interesting, because you're always walking that line, and it can be a tough space to live in if you work in extinction a lot. But I think one thing, not to pivot, but one thing that came up as everybody was talking was I think we're at this space where it's almost like a trickle-down economics model. Profit is the goal, and if there's any trickle-down benefits for good, yay, but how do we flip that where good is the goal and the trickle-down profits are the kind of yay part? And that, I think, is sort of the models we're trying to build right now. Like, doing good is the goal. The money comes from doing good, but that's kind of the role of venture capitalists too, because something like solving chytrid fungus for amphibians, right? There's a major extinction moment for amphibians. There's another one, like 90% will be gone by 2050 or 2030 even. Why isn't everyone investing in technology to fight chytrid fungus? Like, if this was a human fungus, we would have solved this problem 10 years ago. Why isn't every single innovator focusing on this thing that's going to radically shift ecosystems globally? And the challenge is, even if someone developed a solution, how would you make any money? The frogs aren't going to pay for it. The parks don't have any money. So, where are investors coming in and saying, this is for good? How do we make this profitable? How do we make, solutions to the coral crisis? How do we make money? I don't know. I'm not a finance person. So, how do we do that? And, maybe Ginkgo Bioworks grapples with this stuff a lot. I don't know.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So I can talk a little bit about that. So after the pandemic, we leaned heavily on starting up a business unit on biosecurity. And the idea with the biosecurity unit is to have a bioradar that can check what is the biome, how the biome is evolving all throughout the world to see if the next pandemic happens, how we can like keep track of it and get better data going forward. So I think that may be, it's not the exact same problem that you're talking about, but it's a related problem of, okay, if we don't currently have that issue, but if it arises, how would we deal with it? And we are actually investing on that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So not exactly I also think that at a more general level, this idea of the whole culture, I think that 20 years ago, we cared a lot less. Let's say it this way. We cared a lot less. We knew less, but we also cared a lot less about these issues that we're talking about vis-a-vis profit. So I do think that if you have social good and profit here, we are moving to the right as a culture. You heard Nancy talk about, okay, there are funds that are specifically targeted. You also heard, well, if I can get both, profit and social good, that's definitely a win-win. I'm going for it. Mm-hmm. So I think that there is, culturally, we are putting more and more weight on this. In a capitalistic society, in reality, you're never going to get out of profits. I mean, that runs a lot of it. Mm-hmm. So the question is, how do we get social good to be higher in the priority list than other things? Hopefully as close as profit as possible. That's my view.
And one of the things I've seen is, if we could talk a little bit about generational differences, and especially with young people and youth now graduating college, coming out of business schools, there seems to be a bit of a shift in values and a higher priority in social good and meaning in terms of, what they want to see in terms of a professional life, what they expect, say, out of the businesses and the companies and products they buy. So I'd pose to the panel, and we'll start with Nancy. What do you see the role of generational difference in terms of accomplishing that shift in social responsibility taking a priority? And also, we've had a few student questions about how can they be involved and start to get involved and build a career in socially responsible business?
Sure. So on the first part of the question, I feel like every generation that I've witnessed in the corporate workforce, I mean, today I think we have 4 or 5, right? If I think about my parents' generation, right, the baby boomers or Gen X, I think they were sort of post-war very just grateful to have a job. And so staying at one company for 20, 25 years, or maybe their even entire career, like my father's been at the same company now for 20 years and counting, right? For a millennial, and I'm part of the millennial generation, that's very rare these days, right? You often see someone, like, it's a big deal if someone stays at a job for 5 years, right? And so each generation, I would say, successfully has more intentional requirements around equity, around social good. So for example, even when I was graduating and considering jobs, a lot of it was around like the salary or brand of the company or sector. Right? Nowadays, when you talk to young graduates, it's about, well, what is the percentage of men to women in the workforce, right? What programs do you have around DEI? What women support programs do we have? And it's more probably specific to women engineering, right? But those questions are now asked, and Gen Z employees take that into consideration when choosing what company they want to work for. So you see sort of successfully each generation having higher requirements on the social good piece. And I do see actually quite a few students foregoing maybe higher paying jobs for jobs that actually align with their mission, align with who they are personally. So I do think we're heading in a positive direction. Number 2, for students who want to make a career out of social good, I'd love to hear from the rest of the panelists as well. Being in Seattle for 5 years with Amazon, Gates Foundation was a big presence in the city. And I do see quite a few folks having a very successful career there as either program managers or program assistants, targeting a lot of the initiatives that we're talking about here, which is maybe solving species extinction or solving malaria. So those are great, I would say, initiatives that are run by foundations like the Gates Foundations. There are others, of course, and I think that could be a great career path if that's something you're interested in.
Great. Ashley.
I mean, one is I advise two venture capital funds. One, I work. They both are in the sustainability space, investing at different stages of companies. So one is extremely early stage, and the other one is more when you have product market fit and you're scaling your company. And they face different risks, right? But like, what the primary role I play in there is to consult with them and give them input on their portfolio companies, to look at, between solutions they're going for within the same space, within the same industry sector, which one is more likely to have a longevity-based impact that's positive and cumulative, right? And is actually going to address that industry at a source level. So I'm not saying that I don't see those kind of shifts in investment where they are looking at vehicles that can fund and scale a solution set. Simple thing being shrimping, right? Like, you're going after shrimp industry. What can we do to reconfigure that whole ecosystem where there isn't an unhealthy feed ratio, where there isn't stress for the shrimp when they're aggregated in these unhealthy, extremely brine-saturated shrimp farms, and the toxic impact of whatever effluents that discharges. All of those things, they've now created a circular economy around, okay? And shrimp, the shrimp industry that we support through one of the funds that I work with, BCP, they actually are doing that the right way. It's regenerative, it's circular, and that's an amazing solution to see emerge. And if that's going to be the primary way in which shrimp starts to circulate in our economy, then that's a shrimp I will eat. Right now, I don't eat shrimp, right? So, like, there are solutions that we can get behind. So there is hope. The other side of it is when I'm working with, like, industry frameworks. The reason why I can be so, like, kind of, I guess, honest to the point where it could feel like the reality check is too much, is because I'm looking at it from every stakeholder's perspective. And working with everybody, it's easy to get depressed because you get to see all the gaps that have not been filled, that have not been addressed. So I'm exposed to a lot more of those blind spots simply by virtue of skidding around the whole board, right? But I will say, the industry frameworks like B Corps, B Labs, they're doing amazing strides. In the next 3 years, you're gonna see a lot emerge from them, right? But the reason why I don't say that, like, that's a different can of worms, is because any framework that we take on, they're doing everything they can from the perspective of being inclusive, being mindful of how entities can step up. But if an entity is not already considering these heavy questions and already doing everything in its power to shift direction, to try to meet the bare minimum requirements of any of these frameworks, which they can, right, is not enough. It's not coming. It's like the difference between me waking up tomorrow and saying, I'm not going to eat shrimp because I don't think it's sustainably acquired and it denudes massive ecosystems and results in a lot of bycatch. That's a personal choice that's coming from my decision making, my agency, my will. If she were to tell me, don't eat shrimp tomorrow, and I'm like, yeah, I won't eat shrimp tomorrow, you've told me these facts, that's her agency and her will trying to find input into my system. It's not organic to me. It's not intuitive or aligned to me. So it's her DNA. As long as she's with me, I will emulate her and behave like her. The minute she's gone, I will go back to eating shrimp. And that's literally what we're doing, right? So every single time there's a framework out there, whether it's ESG, they're not inherently bad. We are trying to do good in this world. But the problem is that people aren't willing to look at how they can cultivate that culture of change that is truly meant to enact as opposed to just be in a state of intention. So there is no intention-action gap because you're beginning to enact from the get-go. That would mean completely different things, because then if they embrace ESG, ESG is just another value add to their existing ecosystem of transformation that they're embodying. And I don't see that being the case as much as it should be. Not to say that it doesn't happen. Lastly, I would say when it comes to, like, looking at corporations making change, I think a lot of corporations, you would actually be really surprised. I myself was. So, like, a lot of corporations are doing a lot more than we know of. And I'll say that especially in regards to supporting innovation, becoming strategic partners, becoming funders themselves. Like, we have received money from a corporation, which is so funny given everything I've said, right? Like, it seems so at odds with the human being that I am. But I will say that, like, that's where you have to be really mindful as a founder to discern what are the strings that that funding comes with. And if you are really good at negotiating fair terms for how you receive the money and what that money is going to do in the world, then you can still retain the right agency and autonomy to enact the right kind of change in the world. And the corporation's mistakes will not become the mistakes they hand over to you as their legacy, right? Instead, they're doing more good through you. And so I will say that the amount of change they're emulating within their system that they're not communicating because they're afraid if they communicate one thing that they're doing that is good, that all the bad they might have done at any point in the career arc of existing. And these entities have existed 400 years. Like, it's not that they've come into being yesterday. So we can't even like hold them accountable for their mistakes just within our lifetime. We can say, my great-grandfather remembers you, and this is what you did, right? So that kind of deep memory almost holds them back from being able to do anything that's meaningful today. So we have to understand and be present for the change we're asking for and work with them as they're coming into that space of change. And lastly, I'll say, when it comes to like where the real good emerges from, I believe it's both a bottom-up and a top-down. If we are going to sit around and wait for change to occur in the world, it's going to be us constantly pointing fingers and expecting it to happen outside of ourselves. Same thing from institutions. If they defer responsibility and say, oh, legislation needs to occur in order for me to step up and monitor my emissions, not good enough. Every single stakeholder is responsible and should be showing up at their full capacity every single day. That's the only way we move forward. So none of us can shirk our individual or institutional involvement by saying somebody else can take the space. You could take the space. So take that space, right? I wasn't involved with VCs in the beginning, but now I am. I wasn't involved in institutional frameworks, but now I am. The more you assume responsibility, the more people entrust you with the capacity to affect that kind of change in the world.
Great. This was Entrepreneurship for Social Good. Ashley J., Flo Mazzoldi, Kika Tuff, Nancy Wang, I was your facilitator, Nikhil Mankekar. Thank you so much, all of you, for attending today. Let's have a round of applause for the amazing panel. Thank you so much.